shouting distance of winning now. You could almost think that he's panicked. He had to find some kind of stunt that would put him back in the game.
And it's interesting on that theme, one of the most interesting elements of this recording is when he's talking about getting EDL supporters to canvass for him, possibly to be paid. That would be illegal. And he says in the recording, I need 2 white working class lads to be out there for me. And we do have to ask a question, what does it say about our country that a candidate, a former captain in the army who's Muslim, feels that he needs to have EDL supporters out for him? That is obviously worrying for us as a country, I think, that he feels like that. I mean, it's pretty clear there's a Tory formal investigation underway, but you talk to Tory sources, they say he is not going to be candidate.
He's gone.
It's over, he's finished. But one important thing to say, he first met EDL in January to try and stop them holding a march against this building of this mosque in February, and he failed in that. So it started out reasonably, but they say, you look at the recordings, there's no way back.
It's over. All right, thank you for that. There's another spate of polls out today. Once again, they're all over the place. We'll be talking about them later in the show. But as we've mentioned many times before, one possible outcome of what politicians always call the only poll that matters, May the 7th, could be a minority Labour government working in partnership with the SNP and other smaller parties. Last weekend, Miliband ruled out a coalition with the SNP, but that was never on the cards anyway. But he didn't rule out a more informal confidence and supply arrangement. We're joined now by the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Jim Murphy. Jim Murphy, welcome back to the Sunday Politics.
Good morning, Andrew.
Labour used to dominate Scotland. Now it's on life support. Why?
Well, the Labour Party hasn't been good enough or strong enough in previous years, and that was clear. We had three months or so where we were doing things differently, and I think there's a real sense of optimism. Of course, the polls haven't turned round in Scotland, I know that. We're way behind in the opinion polls in Scotland, but the party is re-energised, pretty determined, and we've moved away from being a party where people perceived us to be against everything, and actually coming up with a pretty radical programme for a manifesto, which I think the nearer we get to the election will narrow these opinion polls. But I wonder if, I know we're going to get into a conversation about coalitions and all that sort of stuff. I wonder if I could do the revolutionary thing and say that we're determined to try and win the election.
No, I understand.
We're getting into this. We're into this to come first, not to come in a near draw.
Everybody is. But what is the grounds for your optimism? Because I mean, you've now been Scottish leader for 3 months, and the polls are exactly where they were before you became leader. They still show the SNP heading for a landslide, Scottish Labour heading for the knackers yard. Why have you had no impact?
Well, the reason for my optimism is that the conversations we're having with a lot of the undecided voters who a month or so ago were determined to vote SNP, and at the moment probably this group of voters are more inclined towards the SNP, but they're listening to the Scottish Labour Party again because we've got some things to say. We've got a pretty radical agenda on tax and on welfare, on 0 hours contracts and investing in the NHS, but they're looking at all of that and then realising, I think people are coming more to the understanding that the biggest party gets to form the government. So while Ed Miliband rightly ruled out a coalition with the SNP a few days ago, there's now a sense that it's either Labour or Tory. You cannot vote for a Labour government by proxy. You cannot vote SNP and expect to get a Labour government. It's one or the other.
But you're not just failing to stop the rot. Your own personal ratings are now on the slide too. 51% think you're doing badly as Scottish leader. It's not going well, is it?
Well, we've got a long way to go. I've said that.
Well, you're going in the opposite direction.
If these polls are repeated on election day, this will be a bloody awful showing for the Scottish Labour Party, but much more importantly, it'll be a dreadful day for Scotland because by accident we'd re-elect David Cameron, because on the basis of, 1924 is the last time the biggest party didn't form the government. David Cameron would cling on to office, he'd be an accidental Prime Minister, and if the SNP helped save David Cameron's skin, the SNP would feel the full fury of Scots for years to come. Because,
really?
Yeah, of course, because at the moment,
well, they don't seem to care at the moment. I mean, many SNP voters tell me they don't really see any difference between you and the Tories, and they don't care. They want a big bunch of Scottish nationalists in Westminster to hold you all to account on Scotland's behalf.
Well, what Scotland's been told at the moment by the Scottish Government and by the SNP is that you can get a Labour government by not voting Labour. We've been told that if you vote for the SNP, you can get a Labour government. Now, that defies any logic. You can't get a Labour government by proxy, and the fact is that we've ruled out a coalition. And of course the SNP's argument is that, well, the more MPs they have, they think that they can influence the Labour government. The fact is the SNP have already said they wouldn't put in They wouldn't support a Tory government. So they don't have many bargaining chips in their hand, because the fact is they couldn't bring down a Labour government. If there's a Labour Party is the biggest party, the SNP don't have power over a Labour government in that sense, because we know that they couldn't bring down a Labour government. The last time they did that was 1979. Mrs Thatcher followed in office. All those years of damage. Our history and our politics could have been so much different.
But it's win-win for the Scottish nationalists. I mean, either they are the party, as Mr Salmon said this morning on the Marr show, that if you hold the balance, you hold the power. So either they hold you to account as a minority Labour government, or at some stage they vote against you and there's a minority Tory government formed, and that's exactly what the SNP want, because then they can tell Scotland, once again, you get a Tory government you didn't vote for. It's win-win for the nationalists.
Well, viewers of a certain age will remember, you will, Andrew. I'm a little bit too young to remember personally, but that in 1979 the Labour government was brought down in a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons by one vote. Every single SNP MP joined with the Tories to bring down that Labour government by one vote. Now, the fact is that the SNP brought down that Labour government, and I'm determined they don't get to prevent this Labour government. And the fact is, if they were to bring down a Labour
government, Jim Murphy, and over the 13 years of Thatcherism in Scotland, the SNP got stronger and stronger, and the Tories got weaker and weaker. They win either way.
Well, I'm not to be held to account for the near death of the Tory party in Scotland.
No, but you might soon be for the near death of the Labour Party.
No,
it's
Labour
going
Party,
the same way as the Tories.
The Labour Party has been written off so many times before, where the party have traditionally been the party of the underdog. And this election, of course, we are the underdog.
Indeed.
And that's an unusual situation for the Scottish Labour Party.
Let me ask you this.
But look, we can turn this round, Andrew, and the argument is a pretty straightforward one. The country needs change. If you vote SNP in Scotland, you will by accident help David Cameron cling on to power, and that's the last thing that Scotland wants.
All right, I would suggest people are fed up being told if you vote for one thing you get another. The Tories are saying if you vote for Miliband, vote for UKIP, you wake up with Ed Miliband. You're telling us if you vote for SNP, you'll wake up with David Cameron.
No, Andrew, I'm telling you the biggest party gets to form the government.
Why don't politicians just tell us that if we vote for you, what do we get from you, instead of
Andrew,
the other side?
Andrew, you know, every time I'm on your programme I try to do that, and you keep interrupting me. You say, spare me the list. Let's get to the soap opera of politics. Let's talk about coalitions and what happens after the election. I can give you the long list, but we've only got a few minutes left, so I don't think you would thank me for that. But the fact, so we have got an agenda about tax on welfare and zero-hours contracts and much else besides, but we only get to implement that if the Labour Party wins the election or if we're the biggest party. And the truth is, Scotland is being told at the moment that you can get a Labour government by voting against the Labour Party. The SNP are saying vote SNP in Scotland, Plaid in Wales, Green in England. The SNP have put themselves at the head of an anti-Labour coalition, and Scotland will see through that.
Why did Ed Miliband feel he had to rule out a post-election coalition with the SNP when the SNP had already made it clear that it wasn't interested in a coalition?
Well, who knows what the SNP
Well, they've made it clear they don't want a coalition.
Even today, they're still talking about confidence and supply and a vote-by-vote case.
All right, well,
but
let's look at that.
The reason why Ed Miliband said what he said is that I and he and others had said we don't need, don't want, don't expect, and aren't planning for a coalition with SNP, but not unreasonably. You and others kept asking the question, so to put it beyond any and all doubt, we went from no need, don't expect, don't want, not planning, until ruling out entirely a coalition
I have never
with the
asked
SNP.
any Labour politician if they ruled out a coalition, because it wasn't on the cards. What he didn't rule out, Mr Miliband, was any kind of post-election arrangement with the SNP. Any kind. He didn't rule that out. He didn't rule out a confidence and supply arrangement, which the SNP have said they're up for. Would you care to rule that out this morning?
I'm not getting into further detail of a post-match analysis of a contest that hasn't yet taken place. And I'll say again what I said right at the beginning. We're in this contest to win, not to have a near draw.
Well, we know that.
But the fact is, if Labour becomes the biggest party, what do the SNP do? Do they look the other way? Do they threaten to introduce a Tory government? The fact is, we will put our manifesto to the House of Commons. The SNP can vote for it, or they can vote against it. If they vote against it, it would herald in a Tory government.
Doing any kind of post-election deal. You won't rule that out. You've ruled out a coalition, but that's an Aunt Sally. That was never on offer. But the one thing that could happen if Labour's the largest party and the SNP hold the balance of power would be a supply and confidence arrangement with the Scottish nationalists. But this morning you tap dance round any answer to that question.
Andrew, at my size 13 feet, I can't tap dance round anything.
All right, well, you clumped round it.
But the truth is, if we're the biggest party, we will put our positions on the minimum wage and the living wage, on 0 hours contracts and much else besides. We'll put them in the vote in the House of Commons. If the SNP vote for that, that's nice. If they vote against it, that's their mistake. Because if we can't get a majority in the House of Commons, of course, the SNP would then be responsible for bringing down a Labour government in that situation. Which they did once before.
No, you've said that.
That's
history. It's 1979. You weren't even in short trousers. Nobody cares about that.
Andrew, to do it twice would be a habit. It wouldn't be an accident.
Can you tell me this morning that Mr Miliband will undertake no discussions with the SNP if he's the largest party on an informal supply and confidence arrangement?
Well, I can break the news to you that we're trying to win this election and
trying
to get the majority. And we're then trying to be the biggest party.
Isn't your failure to answer this question why the public, why voters are increasingly disillusioned with politics? I ask you a straight question that demands a straight answer, and you just try to get round it. That's why people are fed up with the main politicians.
That's not what's happening, and I know why you have to say that. The fact is...
Well, you haven't answered the question.
But Andrew, we're having an election. We're going to try and win the maximum number of votes. We're going to try and win a majority. And we can't have an election, surely, with the whole campaign and the whole contest and the whole debate is based about what happens after the election. Let's have the contest. Let's do the voters the justice of having some big ideas and some big debates about some of the big issues. Then see what happens after the election.
People have
but
the
if between
right,
now, Andrew, if between now and polling day,
if you're the largest party, are you going to deal with a party that wants to break up the United Kingdom? It's
Andrew,
perfectly
we've said already
for
before there wouldn't be a coalition and there wouldn't be a deal. But if between now and polling day, all we do is discuss about what's happening after polling day, it's going to be a pretty rotten election campaign. Let's have a contest about the big ideas about public spending, public investment. How do we make the UK stronger here at home? How do we eradicate poverty? How do we project influence across the world? Let's have those big discussions. Then let's debate after the election what happens after the election. This thing about who does what with whom the day after the election is fascinating for you, fascinating for the Westminster village, but real people who live in villages, towns and cities across this country want to know who's going to help them get out of their 0 hours contract and their jobs where they don't get paid enough wages. So I'm going to keep banging on about those issues. You'll keep asking questions about who's going to play footsie with whom the day after the election. I'm going to concentrate on the real issues. All
right. Just find out, you're standing for Westminster again, right?
That's right, yes.
Are there any circumstances now in which you wouldn't run for Holyrood next year?
No, I'm determined and I will be the Scottish Labour Party candidate for First Minister in 2016. And that election in 2016, incidentally, of course, is the big election between Labour and the SNP. That's a two-horse race there.
If you're
the
elected
election for the UK
Holyrood,
is a Labour versus Tory contest.
If you're elected to Holyrood, do you immediately resign from Westminster?
Like I've said before to you, Andrew, and I think you've asked me this sort of question before, it's a really boring answer to a pretty predictable question, which is that those sorts of things I'll announce to my constituents first.
Well, they're watching now. Tell them now they're watching in East Renfrewshire now.
That's exactly what you said the last time when I said this, Andrew, is that they're not all watching. Some are having their breakfast and having a lazy Sunday morning. Not all
so
watching
they don't.
your programme.
The people of East Renfrewshire don't know if they're electing you for a year or for 5 years. That's the answer.
I'll make that clear to them at the election.
Okay. Jim
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks very much. So, on Wednesday, George Osborne delivered his 6th budget and the final one of this Parliament. He claimed Britain was walking tall and the sun was beginning to shine. Though as of the weekend, there's no sign of any post-budget bounce in the polls, which is beginning to worry some Tory MPs. Mr Osborne's number 2 at the Treasury, Danny Alexander, Liberal Democrat, tried to eclipse the affair, though his attempts to muscle in on the act didn't quite go to plan. Here's our Ellie.